what we saw was one of the most horrific sights that's been seen anywhere in the world, certainly not in Israel before, not in any European country before, and not even in the United States of America, even in light of 9/11. This was not just killing, it was absolute brutality, sawing people's heads off, kidnapping people, dragging them away into captivity in Gaza. And not only that, but the terrorists who did this, some of the footage that won't have been seen by the public, show how much they glorified what they're doing, how much they loved spilling Jewish blood. So it was absolute horror, and any decent person, I think, would find it revolting. It was something like equivalent to 10 or 15 9/11s if you compare the population size in Israel to the population size in the United States. And I don't think anything like it has been seen since the height of the Islamic State's brutality. Clearly, we've seen a failure of intelligence and a failure of immediate reaction to what was going on. The time for investigating what happened is in the future. Meanwhile, Israel and its allies have to focus every effort on dealing with the situation and preventing it ever happening again. Once Israel realized what was going on, and the IDF realized, there were some acts of the most extraordinary heroism by Israeli soldiers and civilians, armed civilians in some cases, in dealing with and resisting this onslaught. They killed 1,500 Hamas terrorists in the aftermath of their attack, which I think, you know, it's kind of almost forgotten in what happened, but it is, as well as being a moment of failure, it's also a moment of glory, I believe, for the IDF. I think it's quite possible that there could be terrorists still inside Israel, and the one theory is that some of the terrorists who initiated the attack at the weekend were people who came into Israel, or maybe from Bedouin community or whatever, but who were already on the Israeli side of the border and carried out the initial assaults. But we don't know that. It's a possibility. It's equally possible there could be terrorists still hiding out inside southern Israel, waiting to come out and carry out further attacks, particularly once the IDF gets more distracted on focusing on operations inside Gaza. And so far, I believe the IDF operations have been very successful. They've been working their way down a target list of terrorist leaders, of terrorist infrastructure, communication centers, bomb dumps and missile launchers and other parts of the terrorist infrastructure, and have, I think, caused quite significant devastation to Hamas terrorists. Now, unfortunately, many civilians have also died in this. The reality is that Hamas hide behind their civilian population. They use them as human shields. They want them to be killed by Israel in their counterattacks against Hamas. That's part of their agenda. And the fact is, despite the efforts Israel takes, which are very significant, to distinguish between civilian and terrorist targets, in this circumstance, civilians are going to die. You have a choice. You can either say, well, we'll leave Hamas to fire rockets and then maybe in a couple of weeks' time to have another go across the border, or you can say we will destroy Hamas. But unfortunately, civilians are going to die in the process. I've been in Israel on pretty much all of the former operations in Gaza, and I've watched myself and been extensively briefed on and seen with my own eyes the actions that the IDF take to minimize civilian casualties. And no other army in the world is so careful about trying to kill their enemy while not killing innocent civilians. And to the extent even that Americans and British generals have been over here to look to see what they can learn from the Israelis about exactly that in their own combat actions. And just a couple of examples, there are many, many measures they take. A couple of examples, they will very often warn civilians if they're going to attack let's say, a apartment building which has Hamas terrorists in it. They will warn the civilians to get out by text messages, phone calls, radio. They will monitor from the air using drones or whatever other surveillance that the civilians leave, and when they leave, they'll then attack the building. That's just one example, and they also will tell the civilians safe places to go to that they're not going to hit. Now, given the urgency of this operation today that's taking place, it may be that they can't be quite as careful, can't be quite as deliberate in these attacks, in these actions as they have been in the past. But nevertheless, I know that they are adhering to the laws of war, which require warning where possible, and certainly distinction between civilians and terrorists in targeting. Hamas historically, and they've admitted it themselves, they use schools, hospitals, mosques, other protected buildings, as well as civilian accommodation buildings. They use them to fight from and to attack Israel from. And it's a deliberate policy. This is not just Hamas know they can't destroy Israel militarily. They know that for sure. And even the operation at the weekend wasn't designed to destroy Israel. They want to kill as many Jews as they possibly can. But what they want as well is they want to force Israel to take action, defensive action, against them, which they know will kill their own civilians. And the purpose of that is to create hatred among their own populations and around the world, hatred, vilification, delegitimization of Israel, by condemning them for deliberately killing innocent people, which is not true, but is part of their agenda. Yesterday, the chief of staff of the IDF gave a statement down in the Gaza border, and he said that there will be no more armed terrorists gangs inside Gaza. And what that means is they have to get rid of them one way or another. And there are only really two ways to get rid of them. And that means either killing them or forcing them to leave Gaza. And for the only people that can force them to leave Gaza really is the Gaza civilian population, who recognize that this has been brought about by Hamas's actions. And hopefully, I'm not confident it will happen, but it might happen. Hopefully the population will turn on Hamas and force them to leave, probably leave into Egypt or through Egypt. But either way, the fight that's going to be faced by the Israeli army is on the ground, if they go in on the ground, is very, very significant. I was talking to some soldiers preparing to deploy into Gaza on the border yesterday. They're ready to go, they're preparing and training, and when they're ordered, they will go in. And they reminded me, for example, of British soldiers about to go into Iraq in the first Gulf War in 1991. Apprehensive, of course, but resolved, well-trained, and ready to face whatever hits them. And what will hit them is going to be, when Hamas carried out this attack in the weekend, they knew what the reaction was going to be. They knew Israel would be coming in on the ground. They expected it anyway. And they've made the preparations. So Gaza is going to be laced with booby traps, landmines, ambush positions, snipers, attack tunnels from which they can get in around behind and come from behind the Israeli soldiers and attack them from there. So a huge menace awaits the Israelis. And I have little doubt that unfortunately, there will be a significant Israeli casualty rate on the ground if they go in. But there will also be quite a lot of civilians killed, because when you're a ground force, it's rather different from firing from the air, where you're pretty much protected and safe. But on the ground, you have to have three things in your mind. One is to kill the enemy. Two is not to kill civilians if you can help it. And three is to keep your own troops alive. So all that is very complicated, very difficult, and it's in a very confused situation. And I know that the Israeli special forces and commanders are preparing for a special forces rescue operation of hostages, but I'm imagining that the hostages are well dispersed all around the Gaza Strip, probably underground, and almost certainly with a gun at their heads, every one of their heads, so that if the Israelis do locate them and go in to rescue, the hostage will be the first to get killed. So it's going to be very, very difficult. If I wouldn't go so far as to say impossible, but extremely difficult for the Israelis to rescue them. The air campaign will keep going for the time being, and it will continue even after the IDF going on the ground if they do. In terms of duration, you could be talking 2, 3, 4 weeks perhaps, but it depends. Obviously, even the Israeli commanders can't predict it. It depends on the extent of resistance. It depends on the reaction of the civilian population. It depends on so many different factors, but it's going to be, I think, not a short process. I think the dangers that face Israel go well beyond Gaza. We know that in the north, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, like Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, controlled by Iran and equipped by Iran and armed by Iran, they have an estimated 150,000 rockets pointing at targets inside Israel, some precision-guided rockets as well, which are particularly dangerous. If they decide to unleash their missiles, then that means Israel's fighting on two fronts at the same time, a very difficult thing, but something the IDF is trained, planned, and prepared to do. Success is the removal of armed terrorist groups in Gaza. That is their objective in this specific operation, their removal, and that may be by either killing them or forcing them out, one or the other, or both. And only then will their objective be achieved. Now that leaves another problem in this extremely problematic situation, and the other problem is that Hamas is the government of Gaza. They run Gaza. If they're gone, either dead or pushed out, then that leaves a vacuum, and you see a Gaza that's emerging from a war that needs some kind of control over it. Has to have. Who's going to do that? Not the Palestinian Authority, not Egypt, not the EU, not the UN. It's the only people that are going to control that is Israel. And that may mean that Israel has to maintain a military presence and a military government inside Gaza in the long term.